So welcome all to another episode, and I believe the final for this semester, another episode of Threads of Change, Empowering Social Workers podcast. I am Shakeisha Wilson-Scott. I am your host for today's session. And of course, as always, we're excited to have each person who has joined us thus far in this journey. The mission for the podcast is to inspire and equip social workers to become champions of change, advancing their careers, enhancing communities, enriching lives. But of course, I know that we have persons here who are not social workers, and this podcast is for you nonetheless. I am sure that each person here will take away something from this event today, and you're all welcome. Today's focus for our podcast is autism, moving from surviving to thriving. This month is Autism Awareness Month. I expect that we all know that. That's why we are here. And so the team has taken this opportunity to recognize autism and to just focus on an aspect of it with you. We have with us a nice balance of professionals in the area as well as parents. We're off to a little late start because we're still trying to connect one of our parents, so bear with us as we will begin, as we expect that they will join us in short manner. All right, so I would like to just introduce our team of persons today with us. I'm just ensuring that our cameras are on. So I am seeing that Mr. Smith has joined us. So welcome, Mr. Smith. So I will begin by introducing our team, our panelists today. So I'll start with Mrs. Deborah Manning. Mrs. Manning is an administrative social worker at the Jamaica Association on Intellectual Disability. She is multifaceted. Well, as the social worker, as the administrative social worker, her role is quite multifaceted, encompassing advocacy, support, empowerment, networking, and collaboration to promote the well-being and inclusion of individuals with intellectual disability in all aspects of society. Specifically, assistance is provided to students with academic learning by providing strategic services that identify and address the social, emotional, environmental issues that interfere with their educational process. We have as well Mrs. Diane Lawton Franklin. Now, Mrs. Lawton Franklin is also a member of Jamaica Association on Intellectual Disability. She has over 15 years of experience of helping students with exceptionalities and their families, helping them to live up to their fullest potential. As a behavior therapist, she has worked both locally and overseas and describes the best part of her job as seeing the look of satisfaction on a student's face when they achieve even the smallest measure of independence. Her dream is for parents and the society at large to not only see the potential of persons with exceptionalities, but help to realize those potentials. Currently, she works, as I said before, as a behavior therapist with Jade. And she says there is never a dull moment. We have as well Mrs. Toni-Ann Millen, who has been committed to special needs education for the last 15 years. She's trained in both teaching and learning assessment. She has managed special needs programs, lectured, trained, and coached teachers in understanding and meeting the diverse learning needs of her students. She has worked intimately with families impacted by autism in helping them to understand their children, make appropriate plans for their education, and navigate a journey that has never been designed to be done alone. When you talk about the village effect, that's there. So we have with us as well two parents who will be a part of the panel. We have Mrs. Natalia Pomels, and we have also Mr. LaShawn Smith, who has joined us. So welcome everyone to our podcast. Happy to have you. members of the panel, and members of the audience. All right. So we are just going to dive right into it. And in doing that, I just want to give, for those of us who might not be so sure, just an understanding of what autism is. And I'm going to give you the definition or the explanation I prefer that is put forward by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And they say that autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. Autism often has communication and interaction and restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. Persons with autism may also have different ways of learning, moving, or paying attention. So we're gonna build on that. And I'm gonna start with a little brief icebreaker, and I just want you to put this in the chat. Let me ensure that we're all listening. Can anyone tell me in the chat what is the predominantly the color used during Autism Awareness Month? There isn't an exact color, but we tend to use one color in particular. Just put it in the chat. I see someone saying yellow. No, aha. Who said blue? All right, all right. So you know it. You know it. You understand, and I'm representing as well. Okay. So I'd like to begin with our parents. You know, we want to start with you in terms of just hearing from you. What has been your experience as a parent raising a child with autism? Mr. Smith, do you want to go first? And then I'll go to Mrs. Pommels. Just open your mic, Mr. Smith. Not hearing you.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. As a parent with my child with it's difficult in first because I didn't know what it was. If I didn't ask around and get advice, I wouldn't know because I did get fed up with him. It was a challenge at first, but my child autism is about his learning. It's not about his physical ability. It is his learning. That is where his autism coming. So it was a challenge for me during his tender age in school.
Okay. Okay. All right, Mrs. Pommel, I'm going to build on that shortly, Mr. Smith. Mrs. Pommel, you want to tell us what your experience has been like?
Hello, everyone hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are.
Okay, my son is currently 5, and the initial issues I had was the lack of attentiveness from his pediatrician. I kept telling them, as a teacher and somebody trained in human exceptionalities, that I was seeing signs of autism in him from early, and I was being told that I was overthinking. And as such, I didn't get him assessed until he was 3. I could have done it much sooner if people were just listening, his doctor was just listening to me and being attentive to what I was saying. Accessing schools that are trustworthy, being that my son is actually currently nonverbal. He's barely verbal now because he's began speech therapy for about a year or a little over. So he will speak now, but finding schools that are trustworthy with teachers who understand enough that will make the parents comfortable enough to leave their kids knowing that at the end of the day, they won't be hearing a rundown of their day or what happened throughout the day. So that was another challenge that I had. However, I'm very comfortable with where he currently is. Other than that, most places in Jamaica, there aren't very autism or sensory friendly. So there's no exceptions for the long lines and everything. And children with autism, they don't understand waiting, being patient, joining lines, a lot of things like that. There's no sensory input where they're being cared for or catered to in most places in Jamaica. So those are major things that really been a concern since his diagnosis.
I want to start with you in building an understanding for us, Mrs. Pommels, when you say generally as a society we are not sensitive to children with autism and the sensory aspect of it. Explain for us, please.
For example, most places, there are a lot of kid area places, and most places in Jamaica don't understand that not all children are comfortable where it's extremely loud, it's noisy, there's nowhere for them to decompress, for them to have a moment of quiet, anything like that. So there's no facility that in around the areas where kids should play that you have anything catering specifically to kids who are on the spectrum. Also, you have a lot of people who don't understand and lack of patience with dealing with them. So when you take your kids to the different facilities, you will notice that your child is being treated, spoken to, or catered to in a different way and fashion as opposed to everyone else because of their diagnosis or because they are different. There's a lack of understanding and knowledge in most of the places, fast food restaurants, pharmacies, even doctors' offices. There's a major lack of understanding and patience in the way that they deal with children with autism. Even adults with autism, there's a total lack of patience and understanding. And that's a major issue in Jamaica that I've been experiencing a lot.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, when you shared, you spoke about the difficulty you had in terms of adjusting to knowing that your child has autism and you know that you focus on his learning aspect. What helped you to get to that point of acceptance and being able to work with your child? Mr. Smith, you're muted again.
Okay, it's because I'm on the work.
That's fine.
What did happen to me was during his tender year in kindergarten, the teachers, they didn't know. I think they think they really don't understand it, or they really don't know about it, because they keep on telling us that he will grow out of it as time goes by. He will come around. In which way he didn't. So they didn't know not either, nor us as parents, because he is my first son. So I didn't know what was wrong with him. I think I met up with a next teacher from a next school, and is a friend of mine, and I was explaining to her my situation. So she advised me and said I should go and get him examined. So it's from there I get to learn about it. And then I have to move him from that school, because he spent around 3 years in that school. And they didn't know what really was wrong with him. They didn't have a clue. They didn't have a clue.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So I guess a lot of teachers here, I don't think they really understand or know about autism, because to them maybe they feel like your children or child is not bright enough, so they don't really have an understanding about the autism sickness.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. No, what I'm hearing thus far from both yourself and Mrs. Pommel is that common thread of not knowing, not understanding autism, whether it's the pediatrician or it's the teacher or even the general setting, the societal setting, and the misunderstandings that come with it. So I want to pose this question to our specialists here. We have a special educator, we have a behavior therapist, and we have a social worker. What are your thoughts on these issues thus far that have been presented by our parents in terms of the lack of understanding, as well as and who it's coming from? Notice what was said in terms of the practitioners, the medical practitioners, and our general educational system. Let me start with perhaps Mrs. Millen, as special educator. I'll take your thoughts first.
Sure, no problem. Everybody's hearing me properly?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes, everything that they have said, I know of those experiences. what he mentioned about the teachers as well is very common. And a deeper understanding and recognition of autism tends to be the challenge. You see, the thing is that they'll be quicker to possibly recognize students looking for a characteristic such as maybe their speech development. But it is very common that parents are usually being told that children will grow out of certain things that are happening. They'll catch on. And it has caused, just like Miss Pommels had shared, it causes a lot of distrust. But the truth is, the nature of identifying, there's a lot of capacity building that is needed in the education system for special needs generally, but especially autism. And it's because autism has so much new research coming out. And so the actual teacher training programs don't go much further beyond the definition and some of the classic textbook symptoms, such as maybe the behaviors. So if a child is having a meltdown or things like that, people might quicker say, but those are not, there are many children who don't experience those challenges or may not experience it at that time, and they're overlooked. But there are other things that are not moving at the pace and they are not being identified within the system early enough. There is also the challenge of teachers who may feel that they're seeing something, but I find that they do not feel equipped to share it with the teacher, with the parents. And so people may see things and not say anything. And that part really comes down with the administration having something clearly set to teachers to say, if there's something that you identify, if there's a concern within your school, there should be some structure, some chain of command that is utilized so that you can have administration being aware, looking into it more, reaching out to the parents, providing guidance. Because I find that a lot of the parents, and I understand where they're coming from, because if you have a child who gets a diagnosis this year or last year, they're not the first. They're not pioneering autism in Jamaica. So it is kind of shocking when you are faced with persons in the system who seem to know so little. And I think that tends to catch a lot of parents off guard. But there's a lot of capacity building that is needed. But one of the things that we'll close in saying, onto your question, is that how we need to look at it is this. Our schools are kind of like a microcosm, right? Like a small snapshot of society. And so one of the reasons we struggle to have inclusive schools is because we do not practice inclusion in society in general. And so it's going to be very hard for you to take something that does not exist in the wider society and create it and train your children to do things that we as adults are not doing. Because children with autism become adults with autism. It's a lifelong diagnosis, which means that these sensory challenges are being faced by older persons within our society, and we still do not have anything in place for them to go to the bank, for them to go to the pharmacy, and all of those things. So if we're going to look at how we're going to improve our school system to train our children to be empathetic and appreciate neurodiversity, we're going to have to go from the outside in.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mrs. Millen. I like where you're going in terms of acceptance and inclusion, and it really builds on what was shared by Mrs. Pommel earlier as well. So Mrs. Manning, I'm going to put you on the spot now as our social worker and ask, what are some of the strategies that you think can be used to promote acceptance and inclusion of persons with autism in our society and across the different agencies? And I note as well, as Mrs. Millen has shared, that our children do become adults, it's lifelong. What are your thoughts on that in terms of strategies? You're muted, Mrs. Manning.
It is absolutely a lifespan approach. And, I can identify with what the parents have shared. The truth is that at the micro level and in order to enable our families to be accepting of their children with autism, we have to start with education and awareness. A lot of them do not know. They don't know what is happening. And I believe that Mrs. Pommel shared and Mr. Smith shared that nobody could tell them what is happening. At least Mrs. Pommels had an idea of what was occurring, but she could not get the cooperation from, the educators and the healthcare professionals to provide the kinds of assessments and support that she needed to be able to get, proper intervention for her child. So one of the strategies, of course, is education and awareness right across the spectrum. We have targeted healthcare professionals, right, and have said to them that you're like the first point of contact. If parents are not seeing their child developing in a particular way and meeting the milestones, they're coming to you and they're expecting you to guide them. A lot of parents have told us that they've missed out on early intervention because they were not being able to be guided at that level. And so education and awareness is a very, very important strategy to, get to be involved in at that level so that we can have acceptance within the community. Advocacy as well is also very important. As social workers, we have to advocate for the rights and the needs of all persons with autism and also the rights of their families so that they can have access to opportunities and resources. And we also need to teach them to be advocates for themselves. So that's also very important. Linking or persons with autism and their families to resources, and they are very few. But that is a big thing because this is a thing that really stresses parents. Where can I go to get proper health care? To get the kinds of medications, to get the kinds of therapies that are accessible and affordable. And these things, so we have to help them to find those resources that will promote their inclusion, right? And participation within the community. So that's also very, very important. We have been involved in training and sensitization of, with various groups, and it's still not enough so that they can better understand, the needs and, of persons with autism and their families, because persons with autism and their families, or especially the families, have said, I am just so traumatized when I have to go out with my child. And because people are not understanding, they are not patient. And so the training and sensitivity with businesses and various organizations need to be done in order to make inclusion, very possible. Peer support programs for families, extremely important. And that is something that we have used in order to let family members understand that they are not alone. There's a sharing of information, among them. There are sharing of strategies as to how to navigate the space that they're in and to provide, and for them to access resources, share information about resources that they can access in order to provide for their person with autism. It takes a multidisciplinary approach, and so it's not a one-man band. We have to work together as teachers, as social workers, as behavior therapists in order to meet and accommodate the needs of the families and the parents, the families and the person with autism. And, so those are just some of the strategies. peer support, collaboration, training, and sensitivity, provision of support services, right? We have used in order to provide that kind of well-needed support.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Manning.
Mhm.
Mrs. Franklin, I note in your bio that we've heard about your experience, which is not just locally based. From your experience, what have been some of the successful interventions, the practices that have actually supported families effectively who have family members with autism?
Okay, so internationally, and we'd like to see Jamaica come on board with this. What happens is that, as Mrs. Manning says, that it is a multidisciplinary approach. So what happens is that the parents get training, that is first and foremost, because what we find out is that even when the parents get a diagnosis of autism for their children, there are a lot of parents that are in denial. And so if the parents are not accepting of the diagnosis, then whatever the teacher, whatever the special educator, whatever the social worker or the therapist are going to do, there is not going to be any help or any support at home. So first and foremost, usually the interventions involve training and sensitizing the parents. Next, for all the interventions to work, sad to say, it has to be intensive. Because if, for example, even if we catch it early for early intervention, it has to be intensive for you to see any marked changes. Even ABA students usually get at least 30 hours per week for you to see marked changes. Now in Jamaica, that is not possible because we know the costs and all these sort of a thing. So now I normally tell parents, talk to your therapist. Do not leave the therapy in the therapy room. Talk to your therapist and find out what can I do at home, because most parents cannot afford 30 hours of therapy, whether speech, whatever it is. You understand? Parents cannot afford it. Let us just be frank. So speak to your therapist, find out what you can do at home. Therapists must also be speaking with teachers within the classroom space. Because if a therapist is working on a certain area, they must also talk to the teacher so that the teacher works on that area as well. And so if this happens, then we find out that the students usually get, they usually progress faster than the students who don't get that type of a support and intervention. But Jamaica is not there as yet. Sad to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Franklin. So I'm going back to our parents. Based on all that has just been shared, and I'm starting with what Mrs. Lawton Franklin has said. It starts with the parents. And really, the parents are really instrumental in terms of connecting the dots. So, Mrs. Pommel, what have you done as a parent to actually support your child or be an advocate for your child? Because I believe that's really what it comes down to, the parent as the advocate. Tell us about your experience and what tools you have used, etc.
Okay. The main thing that the main mental processes that I went through was understanding that sadness and acceptance and finding answers could happen at the same time. So even though I was sad about what I heard, accepting it and finding solutions was the best thing to do. And that's what I got on. So I realized he learned a lot through repetition, through staying consistent with things, having a good routine that he could follow through with every day. I retired from my job so I could fully be his caregiver. I volunteer as it's at his school. I'm their substitute teacher. I also help out on a daily basis whenever I can with the other children who have special needs in the class, just to be a guide or an aid to assist to them. When I do the connection between his therapists and his teacher, where whatever the therapist is working on, I definitely do get involved and ask. I have most of the things that the therapists use for the different therapists. I have them at home. His room is a full sensory area that is equipped to help him be comfortable and to learn. I connect the dots between the therapist and the teachers by letting them know the different areas to focus on at each time while he's learning. As far as advocacy is concerned, I can honestly say, as it relates to the medical aspect, he's only been to the doctor for shots. He's been quite healthy. I keep him on a very good diet of fruits and healthy things. I try to avoid a lot of processed foods and processed things. I try giving him mostly healthy, natural home cooked meals and things like that, as well as trying to still take care of myself, putting myself first, because being around for him is vital as well. So
All
going to the
right.
gym, eating healthy, trying to prolong my life and doing healthier things for myself and taking care of myself is also vital while I'm looking out for him. So I just try my best to balance everything and to still put him first and to still know that despite autism, his personality and other aspects of him can grow and he can become competent and independent and whatever he needs to become.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that. There are a lot of insights from that, from
That's
your
right.
experience in terms of the support that can be given to our children with autism, and the lifestyle changes that can help. And it's not just about the child, it's also about the parent as well, and self-care. We never forget that. And I love the aspect of the different
Self-care.
emotions and processing different things while going through your own journey of acceptance. Thank you. Mr. Smith, I don't know if we lost you, but I don't know if you can share with us what are some of the things that you do as a father to help your child with autism? Have we lost Mr. Smith? No, Mr. Smith, are you hearing? All right, not sure. We'll come back to Mr. Smith on that one. All right. We have um building on what was said in terms of we are not there yet. That's the something that resonates with me in particular. We are not there yet in terms of the service provision for our children with autism. Um, I am moving towards the end of the session, where not yet, not concluding. We'll actually share in the chat those persons who are aware of resources so that we can share the information with each other, and the team will do the same as well. But what support exists currently for parents across the different agencies, across the different areas of professionalism? What support exists for our parents and advocating for their own children with autism? I'll leave that open. I don't know who wants to jump on board and respond. What resources exist, or how, let me change it. How can you support parents in advocating for their children and their needs?
I think I'll jump in and then the
Go
other
ahead.
ladies. All right. And so one of the things, when parents find out, they're asking about what next. And they have told us that they knew nothing about early stimulation program. And so, which is, one of the first things, which school should I send my child to that would, cater to is special needs, or what resources are out there. And so, in terms of early stimulation programs, we are looking at places like or STEP Center, which provides early interventions, therapy, and educational support for children. We're looking at the early stimulation program that is um, that is downtown, that is on Hanover Street. We're looking at the CBRJ, which is the Community-Based Rehabilitation Center program. And I believe that they operate in the rural area as well. I believe the early stimulation program has a program in the rural areas. The problem is, right? The problem is that most of these are located in Kingston, and therein lies the problem. We have, in terms of peer support, the Jamaican Autism Support Association, JASA, and they offer, support with advocacy and other resources for individuals with autism and their parents. You have the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities that offers information, advocacy, financial support, and other support which may be needed for families and persons with autism. We have known that Abilities Foundation, because we're looking at a lifespan, Abilities Foundation as well provides vocational training and employment. Our schools, right? The Jamaican Association on Intellectual Disabilities provides special education for the primary level as well as right up to the secondary, and a few programs, vocational training programs for our children with intellectual disabilities, including those with autism who have intellectual disabilities. So just those are a few, and the ladies can jump in, Ms. Millen and Ms. Franklin.
That was a very nice and comprehensive list. And it is true, all of those things do exist. One of the challenges that happened though is that our capacity. So some, like I know, early stimulation is an excellent program, but there's a waiting list. There's a long waiting list. Again, as she rightfully shared, the fact that everything is in Kingston, right? Most things are in Kingston. There are some things in the country areas, but you find that even if it is in the more rural areas, it's serving like the 3 neighboring parishes. And so one of the things that I have found personally that is so important is that while initially, when I was working with these students, I had a child focus initially. But over my years, I've come to realize that when you're dealing with autism, you have to have a family focus. You have to. So, because I started to realize how little the parents knew, how unsupported they felt, and I'm speaking across different financial classes.
That's right. That's right.
So I've said to persons, I have found that autism is one of the most, it levels the playing field in a sense, because whether I work with persons who are more financially well off, they're able to pay for the therapies. And you'd be shocked to know that a lot of them have a lot of the same problems as persons who may not be able to afford to even get in. So from one side, they're looking in and saying, oh, if only I could afford. And then you have another side that is feeling so disappointed because they're saying, I've spent so much and I still don't know. And I think the in-between of it for us as practitioners, wherever we meet these parents, is that we have to understand that as we deal with the child, we have to empower each parent to advocate. So for every child that I work with, I ensure that the parent has a strong understanding of their specific child, because we know how autism, there are differences, right? It's never a one size fits all, and every child you meet is going to teach you and upskill you as a clinician. And so as I deal with parents in that moment, I try to ensure that any program I run in has 2 sides. It has personally, I have something down for the goals and objectives I want to see for the parent as well as for the student. And even like I had mentioned, I have run school programs, and I have found that was what a lot of parents needed. It's very easy to meet them and take the child. Goodbye, I'm gonna do school, come pick them up, and they're just there, and you don't realize their cry for help. They're needing to understand, they're needing to, it was said earlier, and I really appreciate it, the fact that therapy and all the strategies, it is not going to be useful if it happens in this classroom or in the therapy room and then the door closes and you come back next week or you come back 2 days from now. Anything that is happening, I tell parents all the time, you're gonna spend a lot of money in your attempt to get what you need for your child, and not everybody has that. So be careful how you spend your resources. If you are in a situation and the door is closed, you have no idea what is going on, you can't take that and replicate it at home. You can't partner with the practitioner. You are going to end up spending money that you will regret, because you will not be able to measure, you will not be able to come together. And when you're running programs, the best results come out of partnership with parents, because the role we have in the children's lives has different influence and weights. And when you put it together, is how you're going to get that massive effect. And so I just really think that, and I say to the teachers all the time, I said there's a sensitivity in the teachers that I've trained. They will repeat to you that if they've spoken to me, I've said it. There is a psychology of the special needs parent that you must understand.
That's right.
How you speak about their child, and you need to understand that you need to be mindful of every part of your body, because we have some cultural beliefs that we're not even aware of value and meaning with people. And sometimes we're talking to the parents unaware of it, these things come out, biases come out. And so you need to be so mindful that you speak from an encouraging standpoint. You are honest, you're not trying to sugarcoat anything, but in your honesty, you can be affirming. You can make a parent feel like you want their child in your classroom. You can make a parent feel like, even if you don't know everything or have all the skills, you're trying your best. Those things go a very long way, because I know that many parents meet up teachers who are frustrated, feel they don't know what to do, and then inevitably feel like, this is not my job, I never did special. And to drop off your child somewhere where they're not wanted, and some people have to do it because they have to go to work, is not good for anybody's mental health. But it is a reality that some people do face. So I feel that while parents do need, like JASA, as was mentioned, like some state-owned facilities that do exist, I also think we have a personal responsibility in whatever way we interact with these parents, whatever, stage of the process or the journey that it is, that we kind of hold their hand. We don't just take the child, but we hold their hand. Once you hold the parents' hand, the child will follow. And that we have to make that a very big part of our practice.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Franklin, in your own experience, what have been some of the strategies that have worked in partnering with parents? Just heard from Mrs. Millen in terms of recognizing the parent, valuing the parent's own sensitivity, and of course, recognizing the parent as a part of the process. As a behavioral therapist, what have you found to be useful in working with your families?
Okay, hi again. Sorry, have to change location and having some technical difficulties. All right, so the first thing is that the parents have to trust you. And that trust comes over time. That trust doesn't come overnight. And what I find is that if you have a problem-focused approach, so you focus on the problem at hand, you're not all over the place telling the parent, boy, the child not learning, the child not doing this, all that sort of a thing. You're working on one targeted area at a time. Now, I find that when the parents see even small increments of change, then they kind of, the trust kind of builds a little bit more, and they start to understand that, this collaboration thing really can work, that sort of a thing. But as I said, it is building trust over time. And as Miss Millen said, it has, you have to have goals for the parents. Let me tell you something, the biggest problem a lot of the times, it's parents not understanding their roles in this intervention process. And as she rightly says, a lot of parents, some willingly, some unwillingly, drop off the children at the sessions, and they expect these great changes, but they do nothing at home to help the process. So you must be focused. You must have intervention for both the parents and the child as well. But you must build trust, and as I said, that comes over time.
Thank you. Now, I want to go back to our parents. I'm not sure if Mr. Smith is back, but I want to know in terms of support, have you found, well, are you a part of a support group? And I'm talking about formally or informally. So I know we have a formal Jamaica Autism Support Network, but also informally where you might form your own support network. Can you tell me anything about that in terms of whether this has proven useful for you, Mrs. Pommels?
I can honestly say I'm not a very social person in general. However, I find that I have gotten so much support and information from the autistic family on Instagram, and that is where I tend to stay. I find a lot of information there. I find a lot of people who are going through the same situations and expressing similar things, and it's comforting. Outside of that, I tend to comfort myself with finding information and reading and understanding and planning, because I find that once I have a plan and I'm working on things with him, he's learning and he's growing. And I try to just focus on that.
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier was that you were able to start the process, post-diagnosis and linking your son with a speech therapist. The one question that I saw pop up in the chat was, why such a long wait? There is a waiting list for a lot of our specialists. And I want to throw that out at our professional team, but also in terms of the commitment to the process. And maybe this is where you can jump in again, Mrs. Pommels, in what drives you to maintain. Noting that the change isn't overnight. I think it was Miss Millen who said that, or maybe it was Mrs. Franklin, that sometimes as parents we expect after 2 weeks you want to see the big change, So how do you pace yourself as well in terms of your expectations? I know I've asked two questions. One, the wait time. So I'm going to go to that second. Mrs. Pommel, just tell me in terms of how do you pace yourself in terms of your expectations and your hopes?
Well, the main thing is to not be disheartened. And I guess it's from having an understanding and from working with kids for many years. Children take time and they do things in their own time. Every child that I've dealt with, they've done things on their own time. They've learned in their own way and in their own time. And being patient, having a child that is autistic has taught me another level of patience that I never knew I ever had. And being patient will help you to wait and to understand that therapy isn't something that will ever work in a day, in a week, in 2 weeks. Consistency and being consistent, yes, it is quite expensive to get the therapies that you need and to be able to stick with them. However, do the things at home, work with them at home, and do whatever you can, and you will find that they will learn. It will take long. Be patient and be very patient and take your time with them, but help them to develop the level of independence in the different ways at home. Don't baby them and do everything and help them with every step of the way. Let them try and let them do as well.
Thank you. All right. In terms of the wait time, as a specialist, Mrs. Millen, tell me about that. You are the specialist. We need your services. Please share and tell us what can we do.
I'm telling you. So one of the things in this area is the number. All right. Generally in a country, you pay attention to what are the skill areas that you're actually able to train in locally. Speech therapy, Jamaica itself doesn't have a certified speech therapy course. You notice we have a shortage right there. That you're gonna have a long wait, because that means persons have to go abroad and they come back. It also means fewer persons study the area. It's the same thing with special ed, as it relates to the assessment, because even though you're training assessment, there's certain levels of assessment you're allowed to do. And the assessment area is something that's actually very dear to my heart, because I don't think that parents are always guided properly in this area. Now, you can go, I know if it's a quick thing, if you just want to find out, there are medical offices that will do an autism test. It is not a comprehensive autism assessment, However, it will answer the question of the likelihood if that is what you're dealing with. Those type of assessments have their place, and if it's just that you need to know this quickly, that is a route that can be taken, and you can speak to your pediatrician and get guidance with that. A lot of places right now, if you're calling and you're asking to get an assessment, they're telling you that they don't have a date before 2025. And I believe in a couple of months, you're going to be getting 2026 dates as well to get evaluations done. So one of a major reason for this is it's a collaborative effort. Anything that requires more than one person takes time. The report is very comprehensive. So it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for you to get it, but it also takes some time to write. So when you think of somebody coming in and having, and it's just one assessment for each day, that's months of work in 1 week, right? And so it tends to have this backlog. Now, we have this question in the field, we're not sure why, because autism, we don't have like a set, this is what causes. We have things we've observed, but we don't have a set. And so because of that, we can't speak to if it is that we're becoming more aware, so more children are being identified, or if there's a change in our environment and more children are getting the diagnosis, right? We don't know which one it is. That is a live going discussion for the past few years. But either way, the numbers coming in need of assessment, almost all places are booked for at least the next. If somebody says to me that they can get, where are we now? We're in April. They can get an assessment in June, I celebrate with them because it is so difficult to find it. It's quite a thorough process. And that is if you go privately, which can be costing you north of $45,000 up to $80,000 for this assessment. So that's another thing for people to plan for. Again, we're not where we should be, but in the government system, the wait time is like up to a year sometimes and almost equal when you're supposed to get the report. So sometimes I'm meeting the parents and I'm looking at this report and then I'm looking at the child, looking at the report, looking at the child and realizing they have grown, certain things have changed. And I kind of have to use my experience to kind of say, all right, this is the profile of where this child is now to make decisions for that child. And so where that part is concerned for parents, I would say to you, try to get some guidance, whether it is through your school. I know that sometimes can be challenging. Google, do something, because I've had many people go and get assessments, pay a lot of money for it, and then cannot get into the school because they're not valid assessments. They are not comprehensive assessments, and that's very shattering. Or they did a test but did not test for autism when that was your concern. Because a psychoeducational test is a battery of tests. So when you're going in, they need to know exactly, I would like to know if my child has autism. Needs to be said. Because you can go in and they do one whole battery of tests and then tell you that the autism assessment is different. So the assessment world, to go in with a bit of information before, a bit of guidance, whether your pediatrician can guide you, whether if you're at a school that has a special needs person who can guide you, or your therapist, maybe if you are at that level to guide you, or Google. But to get some information before is very helpful. But a start, if the question is just for you as a parent saying, I'm watching my 2-year-old, I'm watching my 3-year-old, and something in my gut isn't right, then going in to just do one at a pediatrician, some pediatricians do it. Just go and get that so you have that. That's a good place to start. But a comprehensive assessment will be needed. And it is needed it's needed for school entry, but it is needed for you so you know how to advocate for your child. And it is also needed for you to get, it was mentioned before, with the JCPD, Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, that may be able to financially assist, aid in school placements, aid in paying for student assistance. Different things are there, but you have to have an assessment to be able to get these benefits.
It's a journey, that's obvious. We aren't where we ought to be. We are making strides though, let's say that. We are though incrementally. My hope is that with the act now being fully enforced, that we'll see a lot more happening. And from the standpoint of awareness through public sensitization, efforts to change attitudes and perceptions, right through to the provision of services. And note there is an opportunity here, and this is directed at the audience, that we need more specialists. So for those of you who are you're not sure what to study, I know we're promoting our own social work programs, but hey, there is an opportunity as well for you to dive into one of these areas and become one of the needed specialists in this area of supporting our children and our families dealing with autism. Where does the time go? So I realize that we are pretty much out of time, but before we conclude, I really want to give each person the opportunity to share something. And as a parent, Mrs. Pommels, I'd like you to share a gem of wisdom that you'd like to offer to any other parent out there who also has a child with autism. And in terms of my practitioners, from where you sit, what recommendations can you give as well, gems of wisdom, to our families who have someone as a member who has autism? So I'm going to start with Mrs. Pommels. Unfortunately, I think we lost Mr. Smith, so we'll cling to you, Mrs. Pommels.
All right. I'd like to tell any parent, because one moment that was very damning and sad for me was when I got my assessment done, and the way that the person ran or went down the assessment with me and the things that they told me, it was disheartening, and I felt so sad and so low. And I would like to tell any parent out there that do not let the things that are told to you or let somebody dictate what your child can become when you're given the assessment. That's just the beginning. You can help and guide and mold and protect your child and help them to become whatever it is that they aspire to be. You can help them to achieve their goals. Don't be disheartened. Be hopeful. Always read. Make Google your best friend. Research as much as you possibly can. Get as much information as you possibly can, and do the best by your child in any way possible.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Manning, you want to go next? I see. All right, I realize what's happening. That's all right. All right, go Mrs. Manning, and then I'll go to Mrs. Franklin.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Scott. I would just like to encourage our parents and, our practitioners who are working with our parents. When our parents come to us, we need to give them hope. We need to do our research. What is out there? Because they need to know they're coming to us for information. And as they come for us for information also, we need to listen to them. That is very important because they are the experts. I heard Mrs. Pommel saying that I knew that there was something wrong with my child and she was being ignored. They are the experts and we need to listen to them. We need to work with them so that together we can come up with the right kinds of approaches to assist our children with autism. So that is very important, right? Providing that kind of support and hope as a social workers to our families, and for our families to remember that they are the experts. So push. Okay, I tell them, so hit at my door anytime. Quarrel, just to raise the roof because we want to hear what is happening with you, because we want to advocate with you to get the services that are needed.
Thank you, Mrs. Franklin.
All right. So for my parents, I just want to say and just echo what Mrs. Pommel said. Consistency is key. And for parents, follow that gut feeling. Usually when you get that gut feeling, it is usually right. For the practitioners, I want you to speak from a place of knowledge. So you cannot speak from a place of knowledge unless you get the experience. So we at the Jamaican Association on Intellectual Disabilities, we have 5 schools across the island. You can get all the experience you want so that you can speak from a place of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Millen.
Right. For the parents, it is a journey as you are recognizing. And initially, when you get an assessment and everything kind of comes down in terms, especially depending on how it is delivered. But just like other children, sometimes you have to remember that this child is going to grow. They're going to go through different stages of development. Things are going to come in its time, as Mrs. Fondel shared. There are going to be abilities that you never thought possible, and you must always leave that ceiling open for them to keep that hope. I would also say, because you're an advocate, everybody who deals with your child should be dealing with you. And so there should be conversation, there should be support on either side, because sometimes teachers also need your support in understanding your child. As we just said, you're the expert with your child. You might need to give some tips about how you manage their behaviors or how you manage certain things or what you notice about their behaviors or what may cause it, triggers and things like that, to give them that to support them in the classroom. And also, it goes a far way when students see that the teacher and the parents are together working for their benefits. And for us as clinicians, it is important. I know that we have, over the years, we have dealt with many children. And so sometimes, just as in any occupation, you can become hard to the reality of it because, okay, this is like my thousandth kid. Yeah, I know this, I've seen this, and it's very tempting. It's something that I think we have to just reflect very often on and be mindful and check ourselves on. That for you, it's a unique experience, and so I need to be attentive to your unique experience. I can give you the benefits of my experience of what I've seen in other times, but I'm aware that you could be different. I will listen to what you're saying, and I am prepared to learn from your journey as well.
Thank you so much. Now, I am going to ask our specialist to just respond to a question in the chat, if you can, if there is any advice for autistic adults, or maybe you want to point our audience to any resources, any agency that can offer that type of support, or if you want to make yourself available, feel free to just put that information in the chat. Wow. From moving from surviving to thriving, we have heard our parents in terms of their experiences from the point of garnering an inkling that something might not be right, moving through the point of diagnosis, their experiences, which have I think for both started off with some difficulty. It has not been smooth, and their experiences are quite consistent with those of many of our other parents in this country. What they share, we have heard time and time again, and we have experienced this as well for those who may also be parents of children with autism or with another type of disability. But the journey continues. It moves from surviving to thriving. We heard the strategies in terms of self-care, in terms of parent listening to that intuition, trust that voice, that thing that you hear, that sixth sense, as we tend to say. Parental intuition is a thing. So trust it and act on it. Moving towards a parent as the advocate and ensuring that as a parent, you remain a part of the process from the perspective of our practitioners, the importance of the empathy, the importance of experience, the importance of knowledge, so that ongoing process to ensure that we meet the needs of our parents and the wider families, recognizing that it's not a matter of one shoe fits all. I loved when you said that Mrs. Millen, is not a one shoe fits all scenario, and oftentimes that's the experience. So we treat each person as individual and unique as we are, right? And just the role of research in terms of keeping abreast of what exists as new evidence in terms of the way forward. We as a country, we have a far way to go, but we still tap into what exists. We still tap into the strengths. We still tap into the existing resources. I know some information has been shared in terms of JADE, Jamaica Association on Intellectual Disabilities. There are other agencies. We heard about the Early STEM program. We also have MACAM, and there are a range of entities. If you, as Mrs. Hummel said, Google, embrace Google as a friend. It works, but you can also access us. I'm sure you would have seen the unit's number, you would have seen where Jade's number has been shared and so on if you need access to further information. You have been a wonderful audience, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the fact that our panelists have taken the time to join us. I just want to thank persons for tuning into this episode of Threads of Change, Empowering Social Workers and Everyone on Board podcast, where we all come together to inspire, empower, and effect positive change. We will maintain that collaborative approach that we spoke about. Special thanks to our guests, our parents, Mrs. Pommels, Mr. Smith, in terms of our practitioners, Mrs. Manning, Mrs. Lowton Franklin, and Mrs. Millen. I thank you dearly in terms of the insights that you have shared, our parents in particular, for being so honest with us in terms of your experiences. We'd like to thank as well our podcast team comprising Shamina Blackwood, Rashad Ford, Camila Brown, Sheree Dana Campbell, Tessie Scott, Doctors Sharon McKenzie and Joanna Simpson. I would like to thank as well, I think I am omitting someone here. We are thanking as well Natalia McCain. Thank you as well for your role. And of course, Mr. Bell, our IT support from the faculty. Thank you for making this happen. Audience, thank you. You are our treasured community. We look forward to having you on board for future podcasts. And if you have any questions, if you have anything that you'd like us to cover as a topic of interest, feel free to reach out to us through our social media pages. I believe that information has already been shared in the chat. As your host, Shakeisha Wilson-Scott, member of the Social Work Unit, Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work, UWI. I was happy to be a part of this discussion, and I invite you to join us again as we continue to work together on the podcast and outside of this setting. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of the day.